The murder of Dorothy Jane Scott, a chilling unsolved mystery. Dorothy Jane Scott was a quiet, kind-hearted woman, the kind who seemed to go unnoticed in the busy world of Southern California in the late 1970s and early 1980s. She was 32 years old, a single mother raising her young son, Sean, and living a life that by all accounts was simple, modest, and far from dangerous. Friends and family described Dorothy as a gentle soul, someone who preferred staying at home rather than going out to parties, and whose life revolved around her child, her work, and her family. She worked as a secretary for two jointly owned stores, Swinger's Psych Shop and Custom John's Head Shop in Anaheim. Her routine was steady. She drove her white Toyota, spent her days at work, took care of her son, and attended church with her parents. But beneath this normal, peaceful life, something dark was beginning to take shape. Something Dorothy could not have predicted, and something that would haunt her family for years to come. It began innocently enough, or so it seemed, with a phone call. Then another, and another. At first, Dorothy didn't know who it was. The man's voice was calm at times, tender even, telling her how much he loved her, how beautiful she was. But as the days turned into weeks, the tone changed. He began to threaten her life, telling her he would get her, and that there was nothing she could do about it. Sometimes, he would describe to her in chilling detail what she was wearing that day, proving that he was watching her from somewhere nearby. Other times, he would tell her that he had something for her, a gift. Once, he left a single dead rose on her car windshield. Dorothy was growing more and more frightened, but she didn't know who the caller was. She had no enemies, no former lovers who might hold a grudge, no disputes with anyone. She confided in her family and close friends, telling them about the calls. Her mother urged her to go to the police, but Dorothy wasn't sure what they could do without knowing the man's identity. Still, she made sure to take precautions, always locking her doors, never walking alone at night, and watching for any suspicious activity. On the evening of May 28, 1980, Dorothy had a meeting at work. It was an ordinary Wednesday, nothing unusual, until one of her coworkers, Conrad Bostrom, began feeling ill. His arm was swollen and red, and another coworker, Pam Head, suggested he should go to the emergency room. Dorothy offered to drive them both to the hospital. She first stopped by her parents' house to check on her son, who was staying there that evening. She told her mother she would be back later and not to worry. Then, she drove her coworkers to the UCI Medical Center in her white 1973 Toyota station wagon. At the hospital, they discovered Conrad had been bitten by a black widow spider and needed treatment. They waited for him to be seen by a doctor. Dorothy stayed with them the entire time, never leaving their side except for one moment, to go out to the parking lot and quickly move her car closer to the entrance so it would be easier to leave later. When she returned, she told her friends she had also changed her scarf. It was a simple black scarf before. Now, she wore a red one. By around 11 p.m., Conrad was discharged from the hospital. Dorothy told her friends she would go to the parking lot and pull the car up to the curb so they wouldn't have to walk far. Pam and Conrad waited by the entrance. Minutes passed, then more minutes. They thought maybe she was taking a while to get the car started or had stopped for something. But after 5, then 10 minutes went by, they began to feel uneasy. Suddenly, they saw Dorothy's car speeding toward them. But something was wrong. The headlights were on full beam, blinding them, and the car wasn't slowing down. Instead, it drove right past them, fast. Too fast for Dorothy's normal driving. They called out, but the car vanished into the night. At first, they thought maybe there was an emergency with her son. But when she didn't return and didn't call, they reported it to the police. Hours later, Dorothy's car was found abandoned in an alley in Santa Ana, about 10 miles away from the hospital. It was on fire. By the time firefighters put out the flames, the vehicle was completely destroyed. There was no sign of Dorothy. No one saw her leave the hospital. No one saw who was driving the car. And from that moment, Dorothy Jane Scott was gone. In the weeks after her disappearance, her family lived in a state of unbearable anxiety. They didn't know if Dorothy was alive, if she was being held somewhere, or if she had been killed. Then the phone calls began again. This time, the man called Dorothy's parents' home. Her mother, Vera, answered. The man asked, "Are you related to Dorothy?" When Vera said yes, he replied chillingly, "I've got her." Then he hung up. These calls continued, week after week, sometimes when Vera was alone, sometimes when her husband Jacob was there. The police tried to trace the calls, but the man always hung up before they could pinpoint the location. Each time, his tone would shift, sometimes sounding as if he cared for Dorothy, other times threatening and cruel, as if mocking the family's grief. For 4 long years, Dorothy's parents endured this torture. Then, in August of 1984, there was a break, or so it seemed. Construction workers discovered charred human remains near Santa Ana Canyon Road. Alongside the bones were a dog's remains and a turquoise ring that Dorothy had been wearing the night she vanished. Dental records confirmed it. The remains belonged to Dorothy Jane Scott. The coroner estimated she had been dead for at least 2 years, meaning she may have been alive for some time after her disappearance, or perhaps her remains had been hidden for years before being found. The cause of death could not be determined due to the condition of the remains. Even after this grim discovery, the calls didn't stop, at least not right away. The man called again after news of Dorothy's body being found was reported. But still, the calls were too short to trace, and no suspect was ever identified. To this day, no one knows who the caller was, why he targeted Dorothy, or what really happened on that night in 1980. Some believe the killer was someone she knew casually, perhaps a customer from her workplace, or a man who had been infatuated with her and grew angry when she didn't return his feelings. Others think it was a stranger who became obsessed with her after spotting her somewhere. The most haunting theory is that the man had been stalking her for months, watching her every move, and that the night of May 28th was the night he decided to act. Dorothy's case remains officially unsolved. Her family lived the rest of their lives without knowing who took her away or why. Her mother, Vera, passed away in 2002, still waiting for justice. Her son, Sean, grew up never truly knowing the woman who had loved him so fiercely and had her life cut short in such a cruel, senseless way. The murder of Dorothy Jane Scott is a chilling reminder that evil can lurk quietly in the shadows, watching, waiting, and that sometimes, even with clues, even with witnesses, the answers never come. Somewhere out there, the man who called Dorothy Jane Scott, who stalked her, who may have been the last person to see her alive, might have walked free for the rest of his life. And that is perhaps the most unsettling fact of all, that monsters do not always look like monsters, and that the face of Dorothy's killer could have been that of an ordinary man, blending into the crowd, smiling at neighbors, hiding in plain sight.